announcements? Oh, did you record, Dory?
Yeah, I sent it to the cloud.
Perfect, okay, thank you. Okay, and then I think yeah, I don't know if it's useful to pin me so that I know once the text.
I already have you
goes.
spotlighted.
Oh, you do, okay, great.
for doing-
Okay, so, good evening, everyone. I hope, you all had wonderful holidays. So you know that when you came here, I'm sure you saw lots of Orthodox Jews walking to the synagogue. Because, do we know why they were walking to the synagogue? That's correct, because on their calendar, tonight and tomorrow is Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah for us was last night and today. That's because they celebrate 2 days of a festival day, of each festival day, while we celebrate one. And yesterday or today, or last night and then today until sundown was the festival of Shmini Atzeret, which is the 8th day in the sequence of Sukkot, right after the end of Sukkot. We Reform Jews celebrate Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah as one, whereas Orthodox and Conservative Jews in the diaspora celebrate one day of Shmini Atzeret, and then the second day of Shmini Atzeret is Simchat Torah. So that's why they are celebrating a Chag tonight while we are not. So that's one thing that I just want to make sure everybody understands. Secondly, tomorrow morning, if you are interested and you haven't signed up yet, we are taking a field trip to the Jewish Theological Seminary to visit the rare book room, not tomorrow, Thursday. I keep thinking this. Sorry, Thursday morning. We're going to the Jewish Theological Seminary's rare book room in Manhattan. It's really a very interesting presentation. We went last year. We're going to learn more this year. Nina Koppelman is our sponsor for the visit. And if you'd like to join, just call the temple tomorrow. You can sign up to that. It will be on Thursday. And then I just want to make sure everybody knows that next Wednesday night, the 22nd, we have a special event here. The author Yaakov Katz, who wrote a book entitled "While Israel Slept," about the events leading up to October 7th, will be here to speak about his book. And I heard an interview on a podcast with him. He's very fascinating information. I think you'll enjoy it. You have to register through the temple, and your registration fee includes a book, a copy of the book. Oh, hi, Carol. Here's your binder. You can come get it. Here's your binder. Welcome. Okay, so with that, we're going to get into our course for tonight. And then from now, we're going to be meeting weekly. We've had this kind of soft start with sessions every other week, but from here, we go to weekly because now the holidays are over. So tonight is going to be our third and final session on Christian anti-Semitism. Next week, we're going to begin the unit on Muslim anti-Semitism, and we have two of you who have signed up to present the summaries of the readings. So Martha and Andy. And just as a reminder, you guys signed up to present the readings for next time. So remember, the assignment there is just one paragraph distilling the key takeaways of your reading. So tonight we're going to be in our third session of Christian anti-Semitism. So you're going to see tonight that that from here, the material that we're going to be reading is just going to get worse. You know, we read, you know, the text from the ancient world, you know, or what, you know, what they were, you know, anti-Semitism in the ancient world, really centered on this kind of, disdain for the fact that, the Jews kept themselves separate and wouldn't join in with the broad pantheon of, you know, religions in the ancient world. And then we read Paul and the New Testament and Augustine, the church fathers, and that literature, you know, that's highbrow literature. I mean, you know, the New Testament, the church fathers are very important and world-changing texts that many hold sacred. And, you know, although the ideas in there for Jews were difficult, for us, they're presented in the context of a philosophy of religion. And, you know, certainly Paul and Augustine are, you know, regarded, generally speaking, as very important thinkers in the world. Now we're going to get into the Middle Ages. And it's really in the Middle Ages where it turns very ugly. Of course, all of this in the Christian texts that we're going to be reading today build on what came before. They wouldn't say what they said were it not for the texts, you know, that we've read before, and the ideas introduced by Paul in the Gospels and Augustine and others. But it just gets worse. So prepare yourselves, because it feels like each successive week is probably just going to get uglier and uglier. Arlene.
Yeah, it just struck me, without jumping, that in this section, the medieval Spanish law,
Yeah.
was laws in the 1300s,
Yeah.
are not any different than the laws in the 300s. The things,
Similar,
again,
very similar.
building on them.
Yeah, we're gonna read them
Yeah,
together.
just
Okay,
600 years.
that's right.
Make a difference.
That's right. It does build, it all builds on,
Yeah.
it all builds on what came before. So we're gonna look at 3 texts tonight. First, we're going to look at, the text entitled Las Siete Partidas, the Spanish law code from the 13th century. Then we're going to look at Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. From the very end of the 14th century, we're going to read the Prioress's Tale. And then we are going to read Martin Luther, who is the founder of Protestantism.
Yeah.
Yes, question?
Nina had her hand up.
Okay, Nina.
You're muted, Nina.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I did want to say one thing about going to JTS, to the Rare Book Room. And that is that, unlike most times when we see ancient books or books that are 100 years or older, they're in glass cases, and we kind of walk by and stare at them. But in the case of our being able to study at JTS, we actually are able to lay our hands on these books, because the idea is that, it used to be that, they were so delicate and anybody who touched them could possibly destroy them. But we learned last year, that that's not really the case. And we are very much encouraged to really find our own way of communicating with the books that we see. So I really do hope that you will take the opportunity, which is not something that most Jews have, to be able to really spiritually and physically communicate with these these books that are, decades, if not hundreds of years old. So I hope all of you that can do it will. So that's just my little plug for JTS.
Great, thank you, Nina. Thank you for sponsoring that. Okay, so we are going to start with Las Siete Partidas. Any Spanish speakers? You don't have to really be a very sophisticated Spanish speaker to translate that. What is Las Siete
Sí se
Partidas?
puede. Ujú.
What? Seven. The 7 parts. The 7 parts. Okay. Las Siete Partidas. The 7 parts. It's a law code written in the 13th century under the auspices of the Spanish king, I believe Castillo, Alfonso X. Now, before we read it, let's just talk about the 13th century in Spain. Okay, so what do we know about Spain in the Middle Ages? Yeah, Michael.
The Christians had recently reconquered Spain.
Very good.
At the time of the reconquest.
That's right, good. Yeah, the Reconquista. Okay, the reconquest of Spain. So prior to the 13th century, through the early part of the Middle Ages, Spain was ruled by whom? Muslims, right? And from the Jewish perspective, in Jewish history, the period of the Middle Ages, the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries in Spain is has a name. That period, what do we call it in Jewish history? The Golden Age of Spain. Okay, because Jewish life under Muslim rule in Spain was pretty good. Jews flourished there in terms of most all aspects of life, economically, intellectually, creatively. Jews served in positions in government, advisors, top, advisors to the Muslim rulers. It was in Muslim Spain that Jewish, all kinds of Jewish intellectual developments took place, the writing of liturgical poetry, philosophy, intellectual pursuits of the time. Well, in the 13th century, life in Spain for Jews changes, and that's because of the Reconquista, the reconquering of Spain by Christian rulers. And it takes some time, but by the 13th century, at least the end of it, Spain is all Christian again, except for maybe one little small section. Is Christian again. And so because Spain is under the rule of Christians, and we know, and at this time it's Catholic, there is no Protestantism yet, because the Protestant Reformation doesn't come along until several centuries later. So this is the Catholic Church. These are kings who are Catholics and have a certain loyalty to the Catholic Church and to Catholic doctrine. And so what did we learn last time from reading the Church Fathers about official kind of Christendom's attitude toward Jews?
Wasn't too good.
Oh, it wasn't good, yeah, Michael?
Wasn't friendly, and they particularly resented Jews because they wouldn't convert.
Okay, all right, good. So, and
Jews believed that works, like following the law, was more important than faith in Jesus. And those were the two things that they.
okay, good. Yeah,
Dr.
remember
Karen has her hand
What
up.
did Paul say? Paul said what? Karen, go ahead. You want to tell us about Paul?
I've been wondering what we call having visions, whether this was truly a borderline psychotic episode, maybe too much wandering in the heat, but the readiness, the need of the people to believe in somebody having visions, I always have a hard time with that. I just wanted to also observe that already in England, which was not Catholic, in the 12th century, I believe it was Edward I, who
Correct.
expelled the Jews.
Yeah, and the
So
third,
even
yes.
before
The
Los
13th.
Reyes Católicos, the Catholic kings, Los Reyes Católicos, Ferdinand, Isabella, or Columbus and all that. Oh, it's appropriate day yesterday, right? England had already greatly oppressed and expelled those Jews that weren't converted.
Yeah, at the end of the 13th century, in 1290, I believe is the date when the Jews are expelled from England. And England was Catholic then. Remember, England changes in the time of Henry VIII, which is later. Okay, so remember the idea that we saw in Paul was that you know, the aim is for Jews to realize the truth of Christ and to come around and accept Jesus, right? The Gospels taught us that the Jews were responsible for crucifying Jesus, and that the Jews of the time who pressed for Jesus's execution took the guilt collectively upon ourselves and on our children. Remember, they say that in the Gospel of Matthew. And then we saw in Augustine that because of the Jews' collective guilt for the execution of Jesus, the Jews are condemned to wander the earth like Cain. Remember in the Cain and Abel story, which he read allegorically, that the Jews are condemned to wander the earth, to till the earth and derive nothing from it, and to live in subjugation to Christians as testimony to the fact that they've rejected the truth. Okay, so all of this is kind of now the basis. This is, you know, when you get into in the Middle Ages, into Spain. These ideas are important to King Alfonso X and other Christian kings in Spain, and we're going to read the law code now that they put together. Now, that's the religious ideological context of medieval Spain. But then there's the political economic context of medieval Spain, which is different. Okay. Jews in Spain and in other countries in the Middle Ages are never citizens, you know, of the countries in which they live. Jews live in Spain and in these various kingdoms in Spain and other places as guests of the king. And the king, if the king feels that it's in his interest to keep Jews there, then he does. If he feels at some point that it's in his interest not to have Jews living there, then he kicks them out, and that happens a lot through Europe. What interest to the king might having Jews present serve? Yeah, Arlene.
Jews were already active in trade with other countries, shared common languages with understood other countries. So they helped facilitate that trade, which benefited the king.
Okay, good. And there's something else really important. What does an economy need in order to function?
Well, I think the Jews paid a disproportionate amount of tax.
Well, they pay high taxes. Where do they get their money though? Money lending. Money lending. Why are Jews in the business of money lending? Well, they might be smart, but that's not why. Yeah, why, Michael?
Can't do anything else, basically.
Okay, they're confined to the field of money lending.
And since Christians couldn't loan
Right.
at interest, Jews could loan at interest, and the king could use them to.
Correct.
build-
Okay, so this is I guess the main point to know, which is that according to the Hebrew Bible, which Christians, call the Old Testament, and it's part of their biblical canon, it's their sacred text too, it says, you may not lend at interest to a kinsman. Okay, according to a Christian understanding of that in the Middle Ages, Christians were prohibited from lending money to fellow Christians at interest. So, the Jews were useful to the economy of given countries because they could lend money to Christians and charge interest. And this was not only useful and something that they could do, but the kingdoms required them to do it. By not letting them earn their living in any other substantive ways. Jews were forced into the field of money lending in order to make these economies work, because economies have to have credit, in order to work. So the Jews played this role for the economies, and of course the money that they earned then was taxable money, which they paid to the crown. So it was in the interests, the political and economic interests of kings, to have Jews around. There's a tension that's happening here in this part of the Middle Ages. There's a couple of tensions. One is the tension between economic needs, economic realities, and religious doctrine. Okay? And there's political tension too between the kings and the church over power. Right? These kings they're Catholic. They rule their kingdom and they follow the teachings of the church. But at those times in the Middle Ages, the Pope had an army, and it was different than it is now. The Vatican was like a state, and the Pope controlled some areas. They had papal states and whatnot. And the kings wanted to be loyal Catholics, but they also wanted to protect their own power. They didn't want to be overtaken by the church. So you have this tension between monarchy and church over power, and then you have the economic tensions between economic realities and religious ideology. All of this is important to understanding La Siete Partidas, because as the introduction to the text will tell us, and we'll see throughout, this was a law code that was created but not enforced. It's really quite remarkable. It's created out of ideological commitments, religious commitments, but not really enforced because of the economic and political realities of the time. So it's kind of a weird situation, but let's read it. And,
Dr. Karen has her hand up.
Okay, well, Karen, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that relegating the Jews to be the moneylenders doubled the rage against them. They were then accused of usury, and there's the stereotype of the money-hungry Jew, and Shylock in Shakespeare. So it was a double-edged sword. You were relegated. This is the only way you could make money, but then you were doubly scorned for being usurers.
Right, correct. Yeah, people don't like, the money lenders when they have to come and collect the debts. Okay, so let's look at this medieval Spanish law and the Jews. La Siete Partidas, Spain, 1265. La Siete Partidas, the 7-part code, is one of the most remarkable law codes of medieval times. The code, written in the Castilian vernacular, was compiled about 1265 under the supervision of Alfonso X, the Wise of Castile. Its laws, however, did not go into effect until 1348, and then only with certain reservations. From Castile, they spread to all of Spain and thence into the Spanish possessions in the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Florida, and Louisiana. The sources of this code are largely Visigothic, later Roman, and church law, all of which were hostile to the Jew. This hostility did not, however, deter the Castilian state from protecting scrupulously the Jewish religion, as well as the person and property of the Jews. The Jews and Moors, national minorities, were too numerous and too important to be mistreated as yet by the new Castilian state. Okay, now this is going to change later on as you get further into the Middle Ages, but in this period of the Reconquista and the, you know, kind of establishment of new states, new Christian countries and so forth, they really need their economies to work. And some of the requirements that church doctrine would say about how to, you know, handle Jews and so forth are not going to work in reality. This, by the way, this phenomenon of it in legal theory, that scholars call the paper rules versus the real rules, is very common. I mean, it's all through legal texts all the time. In fact, like in our own community, our own world. Okay, like for example, the difference between paper rules and real rules. The speed limit sign says 45, right? And the written rule says the speed limit is 45 and you're subject to penalty if you go over 45. However, we all know that if you're going 46, you're not getting a ticket. If you're going 48, you're not getting a ticket. Like the rule of thumb is something like you got to be at least going 10 miles over before you're going to get a ticket. The real rule is that the speed limit is 10 miles over the sign. It's not the paper rule, but it's the real one. Okay, this happens in Jewish law all the time too. The law codes say X, Y, Z. You can't do business with Christians on their holidays and all this, and you can't buy wine, you know, that's touched by Christians. And then there's the real rules, which they work out in other ways. Okay, so this is not an uncommon thing, but it is fascinating to see that, you know, the country have this set of rules, you know, regarding Jews, and then they're just not enforced in the least. And you'll see the notations through. Okay, so let's start with concerning the Jews. Jews are a people who, although they do not believe in the religion of our Lord Jesus Christ, yet the great Christian sovereigns have always permitted them to live among them. Law 1. What the word Jew means and whence this term is derived. A party who believes in and adheres to the law of Moses is called a Jew, according to the strict signification of the term, as well as one who is circumcised and observes the other precepts commanded by his religion. Now let's just pause here because I want us to, this is a very important sentence in the development of anti-Semitism and you know, anti-Jewish legislation over time. How would you characterize this definition of a Jew? A Jew is what? Judaism is what? It's observance. It's a religion, right? We're saying someone who follows the laws of Moses, you know, and does these Jewish practices. That's what a Jew is. Okay, that's a particular definition of Jew, which is not always the one. that's used throughout time. We know, of course, you know, and we're gonna get to the Nazi laws, but they're very different. But in the Middle Ages, in Christendom, Judaism is regarded as a religion. And one is a Jew if they practice the Jewish religion. If you don't practice the Jewish religion, you're not a Jew. Okay? This name is derived from the tribe of Judah, which was nobler and more powerful than the others, and also possessed another advantage because the king of the Jews had to be selected from that tribe. And its members always received the first wounds in battle. The reason that the church, emperors, kings, and princes, permitted the Jews to dwell among them and with Christians is because they always lived, as it were, in captivity, as it was constantly a token in the minds of men that they were descended from those who crucified our Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, so here you see the influence of the Gospels and of Augustine. And this idea, right? The collective inherited guilt for killing Jesus. And that's really important. Remember, in the Gospels, the Jews, it says the Jews who were there, you know, were saying to Pontius Pilate, like, crucify, crucify, crucify. And then Pilate washes his hands and he says, this is not my fault. You guys are demanding it. And then they say in response, let his blood be on us and on our children. Now, that could have simply been interpreted, you know, by Christian readers as, you know, just a hyperbolic statement that this is how much they wanted to kill Jesus. Yeah, just, we'll take it all on and on our children, whatever. But that's not how it's interpreted. It is interpreted, and we saw it in Augustine, that the Jews of that time took responsibility for this act, for their act, in such a way that it would be passed down to all successive generations of Jews. And this is a weird thing. I mean, like, that 10 generations later, Jews are seen by Catholic doctrine as, you know, the Jews living 10 generations later are seen as guilty of having killed Jesus. They weren't there, but they bear this inherited guilt. That is something that emerges from the church fathers' interpretations of the Gospels. Yeah, Lynn.
And like baked into that is the idea that they knew they were looking at the Son of God and they like gave him the finger, right? Because they acted not out of ignorance, but out of perversity.
Right. Yeah. Now that's an important note because in Paul doesn't describe it that way. Paul's description of the Jews not accepting Jesus is more along the lines of they just don't get it, right? They can't see. But it does morph through the church fathers and into the Middle Ages that the Jews' rejection of Jesus is willful. Okay, they know that Jesus is the Son of God, Jesus is the Messiah, and they refuse to accept him. They knowingly reject him. That's different, and that's a more nefarious, you know, guilt. Okay, Dorothy.
Yeah, it just drives me crazy because, it's as preposterous to think about Jewish parents voluntarily saying, put the blame on our kids for the next several generations. It's as preposterous as the bloodline.
Yeah.
That ingest blood, and the rules are, you can't have anything with blood.
Yeah.
We're the ones who are sucking blood, and we're the ones who are saying, you can blame my kids and grandkids forever.
I mean, inherited guilt is a strange concept. Now, you know, Christianity has it also in the concept of original sin. So it fits, you know, within, I mean, that that's not foreign to Christian thought, right? It's because of the sin of Adam and Eve that then all human beings inherit that guilt and are born with original sin. So it's similar, but in this case, the guilt is particular to Jews. Martha.
But isn't it that once you baptize, that's how you can get rid of original sin? You have to be
Yeah,
baptized to get rid of it.
Correct.
So, having said that, if Jews wanted to, they, through conversion, they too could get rid of.
Yes,
original.
that's
It all goes
correct.
back to that
Yeah.
idea.
Yes, so with a religious definition of Jew, a person can cease to be a Jew by accepting Christianity.
Right.
And there is a way out of Jewishness in this framework.
And
Okay.
if you're not baptized, then you still have, you always have the original sin,
Yeah,
even though.
exactly. All right, let's keep reading. Okay, so law number 2. In what way Jews should pass their lives among Christians? What things they should not make use of or practice according to our religion, and what penalty those deserve who act contrary to its ordinances. Jews should pass their lives among Christians quietly and without disorder, practicing their own religious rites and not speaking ill of the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, which Christians acknowledge. Moreover, a Jew should be very careful to avoid preaching to or converting any Christian to the end that he may become a Jew by exalting his own belief and disparaging ours. Whoever violates this law shall be put to death and lose all his property. We saw this in the Constantinian law. And because we have heard it said that in some places Jews celebrated and still celebrate Good Friday, which commemorates the passion of our Lord Jesus Christ by way of contempt, stealing children and fastening them to crosses, and making images of wax and crucifying them when they cannot obtain children. We order that hereafter, if in any part of our dominions anything like this is done and can be proved, all persons who were present when the act was committed shall be seized, arrested, and brought before the king. And after the king ascertains that they are guilty, he shall cause them to be put to death in a disgraceful manner, no matter how many there may be. No, Christians already believe that Jews kidnapped and killed Christian children for religious purposes. Now, this is also important, and it's tied into the idea of the inherited guilt. This tale of this myth of the blood libel of Jews taking Christian children and doing these things to them, crucifying them, etc. What does this have to do with anything? Why do you think this idea emerges? Yeah.
It's difficult to believe that you're guilty or something that happened so long ago. It just brings it to the present.
Yeah.
Today.
Right. If Jews inherit the guilt of having killed Christ, it's odd, and it strikes us odd that someone who had nothing to do with anything should be judged as guilty. Okay, but the nature of the Jew, as this law code sees it, as the church sees it, is that the inherited guilt is not just because of what the ancestors did. It's because it's innate in the Jew that in every generation, Jews want to kill Jesus all over again. Okay, and they do it again and again and again in this way. Okay, so the Jews of any time are just as nefarious and as bad as the Jews of that time. Okay, yeah, let's keep reading and we'll take some more questions. Okay, so now we also forbid any Jew to dare to leave his house or his quarter on Good Friday, but they must all remain shut up until Saturday morning. And if they violate this regulation, we decree that they shall not be entitled to reparation for any injury or dishonor inflicted upon them by Christians. No, Christians were prone to commit violence on Good Friday, the anniversary of the crucifixion of Jesus. So the Jews have to stay in. If you go out, you know, nobody bears any responsibility if you get beat up except for you.
But if there
Okay.
was a Jewish quarter, he could leave his house and stay in the Jewish quarter.
I guess so, yeah, it says, or his quarter, yeah, but you can't, because they know that, you know, and on Good Friday, they read the stories of the Passion of Jesus. And the Jews pressing, you know, and then Christians would get riled up, like, let's go kill some Jews, let's beat them up, you know? And so the law is saying, like, Jews have to stay inside. If you go out, we can't be responsible for anything that's gonna happen to you. Okay, now, let's keep going. No Jew can hold any office or employment by which he may be able to oppress Christians. But we saw this also in the Roman law. Jews were formerly highly honored and enjoyed privileges above all other races, for they alone were called the people of God. But for the reason that they disowned him who had honored them and given them privileges, and instead of showing him that him as God, reverence humiliated him by shamefully putting him to death on the cross. It was proper and just that on account of the great crime and wickedness which they committed, they should forfeit the honors and privileges which they enjoyed. And therefore, from the day when they crucified our Lord Jesus Christ, they never had either king or priests among themselves, as they formerly did. The emperors, who in former times were lords of all the world, considered it fitting and right that on account of the treason which they committed in killing their Lord, they should lose all said honors and privileges, so that no Jew could ever afterwards hold an honorable position or a public office by means of which he might in any way oppress a Christian. And then here's the note. Nevertheless, Alfonso entrusted his body and purse to Jewish physicians and financiers. Right? I mean, the paper rules versus the real rules. It's really quite fascinating, right? So in some sense, and in this era, when you have the paper rules and the real rules, and they're totally different, and the king is signing this legislation, and then having a Jewish physician and a Jewish banker, what would you say? How would you describe this literature? Like, what's its purpose? Yeah, Martha?
I think the purpose is they're setting it up. If they need it, they'll use it.
Okay,
But they don't have to use it right now.
yeah,
Right now, they could, moderate it.
okay,
But as time goes, these rules are in place,
yeah,
so should the time come when they need it, they're here, they have the rules.
yeah, it could be. Okay, so that it's a threat just hanging over the Jew's head. And we're not gonna enforce them as an act of mercy, but it's always there, okay?
Yeah.
That could be. What else do you see? Yeah,
It
James.
just seems to me that if the Jews they said the Jews killed Jesus,
Yeah,
and then of course he came back, and so that proves he's the Son of God. So if they hadn't killed him, they wouldn't have a religion to begin with.
well, that's true. Yeah, Michael Cook, whom we read a chapter from his book for this unit, he has a chapter discussing that. I don't want to get into it now, but it's not quite that simple. But in any case, what we're learning from this, that Christians, were inclined to commit violence against Jews because out of anger for killing Jesus, and the sense that they killed Jesus then, and they're just always re-killing him. And they're doing it in these other ways. And remember, what did we say? Remember the Gospel of John? We read the article on the Gospel of John. And John used that, John used the term the Jews, right? And remember what he also said about the Jews multiple times? The Jews are the children of the devil. The devil. Okay, so you have that in the Gospels, and the devil, over time, not necessarily in the time of the gospel. In the time of the gospels, the devil is regarded as like a fallen angel. But, you know, Satan is in the Hebrew Bible too. He's the prosecutor in the heavenly court, in the book of Job. But over time, the Christian concept of the devil evolves into this like monstrous, you know, enemy of God and Jesus and everything. And you have this basis in the Gospels of the Jews' association with the devil. We're going to see it more. Okay, but the image of the Jew as monstrous is rooted in that. And here you see it, you know, they're kidnapping children and killing them, and to kill Jesus all over again, and everything. Yeah, Michael.
Well, we read from the beginning. From the beginning, they stated that since Jews could not see being saved by faith in Christ, given all the proof, in order to be that way, they had to be children of the devil.
Yeah.
That's almost from the beginning of the relationship.
Right, well, yes, but remember, for Augustine, we studied last time, for Augustine, Jews were unable to see, you know, Jesus, or outright rejected Jesus, because remember, he says Jews are carnal. You know, Jesus' Christianity is spiritual. Jews are carnal. The law, you know, the law of Moses, the law is carnal stuff. And that's the realm that the Jews dwell in. Okay. So, and then the association with the devil, as the devil takes on this monstrous character, you know, where the devil has appearances, you know, from just art and stuff, that, you know, the devil is ugly and, you know, gross and obscene and all this. And so the Jews kind of take on, in the mythology of Jews, they take on characteristics of the devil in this very kind of carnal, ugly, monstrous depiction. You might also say that in addition to, you know, the law kind of being there to enact or to enforce at will at some point, you can also read this, I think, as literature that's in which the Jew is a character, right? It's not, and you know, it's not, may not be, I might know a Jew and say like, oh, I know Jane, she's a nice Jew, and that's not what I'm talking about here in this text. This is the mythological Jew, the character, the literary character, like a force of evil in the world that's being developed. Sometimes it's developed through philosophical writings, but it's also developed through legal writings. Law is also literature. Okay, let's keep going. How Jews can have a synagogue among Christians. A synagogue is a place where the Jews pray, and a new building of this kind cannot be erected in any part of our dominions except by our order. Where, however, those which formerly existed there are torn down, they can be built in the same spot where they originally stood, but they cannot be made any larger or raised to any greater height or be painted. A synagogue constructed in any other manner shall be lost by the Jews, and shall belong to the principal church of the locality where it is built. And for the reason that a synagogue is a place where the name of God is praised, we forbid any Christian to deface it, or remove anything from it, or take anything out of it by force, except where some malefactor takes refuge there, for they have a right to remove him by force in order to bring him before the judge. Moreover, we forbid Christians to put any animal into a synagogue, or loiter in it, or place any hindrance in the way of the Jews while they are there performing their devotions according to their religion. And note, but Moors were not allowed to have mosques. Jews were not at the bottom of the social scale. But this is interesting because, as the introduction said, the law code here protects the Jewish religion. Right? It sees the Jewish religion as wrong, and is carnal and all of this, and Jews is guilty of, but they don't deny the Jews the right to practice their religion. In fact, this law code goes, takes pretty significant steps to ensure that the Jews' religion is respected. That's kind of fascinating too, right? I want to read more and then we'll take some comments. So it continues here in Law 5. Saturday is the day on which Jews perform their devotions and remain quiet in their lodgings and do not make contracts or transact any business. And for the reason that they are obliged by their religion to keep it, no one should on that day summon them or bring them into court. Wherefore, we order that no judge shall employ force or any constraint upon Jews on Saturday, in order to bring them into court on account of their debts, or arrest them, or cause them any other annoyance. For the remaining days of the week are sufficient for the purpose of employing compulsion against them, and for making demands for things which can be demanded of them according to law. Jews are not bound to obey a summons served upon them on that day. And moreover, we decree that any decision rendered against them on Saturday shall not be valid. But if a Jew should wound, kill, rob, steal, or commit any other offense like these for which he can be punished in person and property, then the judge can arrest him on Saturday. We also decree that all claims that Christians have against Jews and Jews against Christians shall be decided and determined by our judges in the district where they reside, and not by their old men. Note, Jewish courts have no jurisdiction if one of the parties is a Christian. Okay, so in the Middle Ages, it was different than it is today. Jews, lived in Spain as guests of the king, and they are permitted to have their own legal system in their communities. Okay, they have the Jewish communities appoint communal leaders, rabbis, judges, old men, okay? And they manage the affairs of the Jewish community, and the Jewish, and they conduct things according to Jewish law, or according to whatever they're gonna do. The king doesn't care as long as the Jews are paying their taxes to the crown. But here the law code is that if there's a Christian involved in any kind of dispute, it's not allowed to be handled in Jewish courts. It has to be handled in the courts of the country. Okay? And as we forbid Christians to bring Jews into court or annoy them on Saturday, so we also decree that Jews, neither in person nor by their attorney, shall have the right to bring Christians into court or annoy them on this day. And in addition to this, we forbid any Christian on his own responsibility to arrest or wrong any Jew, either in his person or property, but where he has any complaint against him, he must bring it before our judges. And if anyone should be so bold as to use violence against the Jews, or rob them of anything, he shall return them double the value of the same. So it's this really fascinating dichotomy here, right? Of, persecuting Jews, again, in theory, for their religious ideological sins, and using the law to construct a social hierarchy. That's really what this law code does. It creates a social hierarchy, right? Jews can't hold high office. Synagogues can't be, too fancy. Whatever. This is a social hierarchy. But as long as the Jews are in their proper place in the hierarchy, then their religious practices are protected by the law. And so, and that's similar actually to Jewish, to Muslim laws relating to Jews. Jews are also secondary to Muslims, You know, and they had similar things about synagogues can't be taller than mosques and stuff like that. But the Muslims were more generous toward Jews, I think, in terms of allowing them to hold office. But under the Muslim rule, Jews had a second-class status, but as long as they operated within that status, they were fine and they flourished. In Christian Spain, they had this secondary status and their religion was protected. Now, they did not flourish in Christian Spain. Jewish life in Christian Spain was bad. Jews were persecuted, you know, and marginalized, especially as you get more into the Middle Ages. And it's during the same time, the 13th century, that Kabbalah takes root, you know, in Judaism. Kabbalah is mysticism. You know, mysticism becomes popular during this time because mysticism is a religious attitude that seeks to transcend the regular world, right? Either through ecstatic experiences or through secret teachings or whatnot, because, and why is it appealing in this context? Because the real world is terrible for them. You know, Jews living under Muslim rule in the earlier Middle Ages did not pursue mysticism, they pursued philosophy. That tells you, I mean, that tells you something about the nature of the, you know, of the worlds in which they live. Mysticism is appealing for people who want to escape reality. Okay, law number 6, we're gonna skip. It's just the basic. Well, no, this one I think will be okay. They have one about slavery and stuff that is the same as Constantine. Here, let's read number 6. No force or compulsion shall be employed in any way against a Jew to induce him to become a Christian. Oh, this is important. We have to know this for when we read Martin Luther. No force or compulsion shall be employed in any way against a Jew to induce him to become a Christian. A Christian should convert him to the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ by means of the texts of the Holy Scriptures and by kind words. For no one can love or appreciate the service which is done him by compulsion. We also decree that if any Jew or Jewess should, that we don't use that word anymore, right? Yeah, a female Jew. If any Jew or Jewess should voluntarily desire to become a Christian, the other Jew shall not interfere with this in any way. And if they stone, wound, or kill any such person because he wishes to become a Christian, or after he has been baptized, and this can be proved, we order that all the murderers or the abettors of said murder or attack shall be burned. Note this law was first issued by Constantine the Great in 315. But where the party was not killed, but wounded or dishonored, we order the judges of the neighborhood where this took place shall compel those guilty of the attack or who caused the dishonor to make amends to him for the same, and also that they be punished for the offense which they committed as they think they deserve. And we also order that after any Jews become Christians, all persons in our dominions shall honor them, and that no one shall dare to reproach them or their descendants by way of insult with having been Jews, and that they shall possess all their property, sharing the same with their brothers, and inheriting it from their fathers and mothers and other relatives, just as if they were Jews, and that they can hold all offices and dignities which other Christians can do. So you see a couple things here. Jews have a way out of their second-class condition by converting to Christianity, and a lot of Jews did, especially Jews who were who had been in positions of of influence and such. Because even though it says here Jews can't hold high positions, there were such a thing called court Jews. Have you heard that term? Yeah. Court Jews, or like Jews who worked for the king, they hung out in the palace, they theoretically represented the Jewish community to the king, but they got the same thing that we talk about in America, which is the inside the beltway mentality, right? Which is they like the trappings of power, and they forget about their constituents, back home and don't see themselves as part of that anymore. And some of the court Jews, would convert and whatnot. There's a lot of incentive to convert. Pat?
Might not know the answer to this, but if a banker decided to convert, could he no longer,
Oh, yeah, no, it couldn't lend.
he couldn't lend?
Yeah, no, Christians are not allowed to lend at interest. Okay, so we see that here, and we see this, the encouragement of conversion. Conversion provides a good pathway for Jews, and many Jews did it. Now notice here it says that if a Jew converts to Christianity, then you're supposed to leave him alone and not mess with them for having been Jewish before. That's similar to Jewish law in respect to conversion. People who used to be not Jewish, once they convert to Judaism, they're just like native born Jews. You're not supposed to even bring up that they converted. Of course, later on, a couple centuries hence from this law, we have something that flies right in the face of this principle, and that is what? The Inquisition. The Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, the purpose of the Spanish Inquisition was to test whether Jews who had converted to Christianity were really faithful to Christianity, or whether they were continuing to practice Judaism in secret. Okay, so that's against what it's saying. All right, let's move forward just for time's sake. There's some prohibition of Jews living with Christians and having Christian slaves, etc. Now, go down to law number 11 on page 43, Roman numeral 11, page 43 at the bottom. Jews shall bear certain marks in order that they may be known. Many crimes and outrageous things occur between Christians and Jews because they live together in cities and dress alike. Okay, so this tells you something about Jewish-Christian relations in this time. It's saying they live in close proximity to each other and they dress alike. Okay? And in order to avoid the offenses and evils which take place for this reason, we deem it proper, and we order that all Jews, male and female, living in our dominions, shall bear some distinguishing mark upon their heads, so that people may plainly recognize a Jew or a Jewess. And any Jew who does not bear such a mark shall pay for each time he is found without it. And if he has not the means to do this, he shall receive 10 lashes for his offense. And the note, this is an attempt to put into effect the Jew badge law of Pope Innocent III from 1215. So what do you notice are big takeaways from La Siete Partidas? Yeah, Frank.
Not so bad.
Not so bad?
My take on the whole thing is second-class citizenship, but you have certain rights.
Yeah, you do.
So, could be a lot worse.
Okay, could be. Yeah, it could be a lot worse. Civilized? Okay, yeah, yes, Dave.
It seems as if the king is attempting to reach two audiences with this series of laws. One is the church by saying, see, I'm doing it right here. We're restricting the Jews and how they can communicate and behave in our society.
Yeah.
And the other is the general population with sort of a low roar of anti-Semitism is built into the statutes, so that Alfonso can say to the general population, see what a good king I am.
Yeah. Good, and the anti-Semitism here, it seems to me that it makes sense because it's a very theoretical, it's a very ideological anti-Semitism in the sense that it hinges on these religious concepts, right? The collective guilt of the crucifixion of Jesus, the rejection of Jews by God, the subordination of Jews to, to the Christians, the young, the older shall serve the younger type stuff. It's very much rooted in religious ideology. But then in practice, as you say, on day to day, even were this all enforced, the Jews do seem to have like a certain sphere of protection. Okay, Pat.
It goes to the first page where they say Jews in wars are too numerous and too important to be mistreated.
Yeah, exactly.
It's too harsh. They want to put them down.
Right.
But not too harshly so that they can live.
Yeah, we need them. We need them around. Okay, all right, good. So now you can see also, Michael, I'm going to continue just for the sake of time, but you can see also here, roots that later blossom, into things that we know from more modernity. Look, the wearing of distinctive clothing, to mark them as a Jew, the banning of Jews from certain positions, these things, everything builds on what came before. So by the time you get to, our era, what we know of, the Nazi anti-Semitism, which is what we know best, I think. So much of it is that they were able to draw on this vast history, to get these ideas. Okay, let's go to the next text, which is from the Canterbury Tales. Sure. Well, that is if for people who were wearing. But as in our time, not everybody did. All right, so the Canterbury Tales, we probably all read some of it in high school, English class. Geoffrey Chaucer wrote he was English, he wrote the Canterbury Tales towards the very end of the 14th century, which is about 150 years beyond what we maybe more 1265, maybe like 200 years, 200 plus years beyond Las Siete Partidas. So at the very end of the 14th century, what's going on in Europe?
The plague.
The plague. That's right. Okay, so, and we know probably from our studies of history that there were many accusations against Jews, for being responsible for the plague, poisoning wells and doing, whatever. But Chaucer is writing in this context of the plague and this, whatever tropes are out there about Jews in contemporary context, plus everything that we know from the past. Now, it's important to note, as it was mentioned before, that Jews were expelled from England in 1290. So that's fully 100 years before Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales. So there's no Jews in England while he's writing, but Chaucer was a well-traveled man who understood what was going on around Europe. But the story of the Canterbury Tales, and this lens, I was doing some reading about Chaucer and about the Prioress's Tale, and I found that there's kind of debate amongst Chaucer scholars about, whether Chaucer is expressing the anti-Semitism of the Prioress's Tale or is writing a character who has these views because she's like somebody in England of the time. Okay, and so it seems to be there's a debate over that amongst Chaucer scholars, because the Canterbury Tales is a collection of these short stories, each of which is, put in the mouth of a character. that's making a Christian pilgrimage. So he's creating characters. Now, is the prioress an anti-Semitic character that he created, but he doesn't share her beliefs? Or was he an anti-Semite himself? We don't know. But we can see here the tale reflecting what, in any case, some people in England of the time would be thinking about Jews. Okay, so there's a prologue and everything we're not going to read, but if you go down a couple of pages to the bottom of the, what is that, the second page? Yeah, the bottom of the second page, it says the prioress's tale. So we're going to read it, and we want to read it carefully and pay attention to the imagery and the language, and this is literature. So pay attention to the character, the characters that he's creating here. In Asia, once there was a Christian town in which long since a ghetto used to be, where there were Jews supported by the crown for the foul lucre of their usury, hateful to Christ and all his company. And through this ghetto one might walk or ride, for it was free and open either side. Now there you saw the usury thing and the foul lucre. Lucre is money. Dirty money. Okay, so he's telling us here in the story that in the Christian culture of this time, the Middle Ages, that money has this taint to it. It's foul, and Jews are the ones that deal in it. They're the money lenders, etc. So here you now have, and remember, the Jews are forced into that by the kings, but nevertheless, the Jews take on this association of dirty money. Okay, which is obviously a trope that gains force in anti-Semitism. And it says here, the Jews are supported by the crown, right? They're there, the king has them there purposely to engage in the foul lucre, in the financial trades. And it's hateful to Christ. Okay. A little school stood for the Christian flock down at the further end, and it was here a heap of children come of Christian stock received their early schooling year by year, and the instructions suited to their ear, that is to say, in singing and in reading, the simple things of childhood and good breeding. Among these children was a widow's son, a little chorister of 7 years old, and day by day to school he used to run, and had the custom, for he had been told to do so, should he happen to behold an image of Christ's mother, to kneel and say, Hail Mary, as he went upon his way. Thus had this widow taught her little boy to reverence the mother of Christ, our dear and blissful Lady, and it was his joy. A happy child will always learn and hear. When I remember this, the ever near Saint Nicholas stands in my presence, he who did Christ reverence in infancy. This little child, while he was studying his little primer, which he undertook, sitting at school, heard other children sing, O Alma Redemptoris, from their book. Close as he dared, he drew himself to look, and listened carefully to work and part, until he knew the opening verse by heart. He had no notion what this Latin meant, being so young, so tender, so green. But in the end, one morning there he went and asked a comrade what the song might mean, and why it was in use. He was so keen to know it that he went upon his knees, begging the boy, explain it, if he please. His schoolfellow, an older boy than he, answered him thus, This song I have heard say is to salute our blessed Lady. She will hear us when we turn to her and pray for help and comfort on our dying day. I can explain no more, that's all I know. I can learn singing, but my grammar's slow. And is this anthem made to reverence Christ's mother, said this innocent? If I may, I certainly will show my diligence to learn it off by heart for Christmas Day. Though they should scold me when I cannot say my primer, though they beat me thrice an hour, I'll learn it in her honor to my power. So every day his comrades secretly, as they went homewards, taught it him by rote. He sang it with a childlike clarity and boldly, word by word and note by note. And twice a day it filled his little throat, going to school and coming back again, praising Christ's mother with all his might and main. As I have said, this child would go along the Jewish street, and of his own accord, daily and merrily he sang his song, O Alma Redemptoris, as it soared, the sweetness of the mother of our Lord, would pierce his heart. He could not choose but pray, and sing as to and fro he went his way. First of our foes, the serpent Satan shook those Jewish hearts that are his waspish nest, swelled up and said, O Hebrew people, look, is this not something that should be redressed? Is such a boy to roam as he thinks best, singing to spite you canticles and saws against the reverence of your holy laws? From that time forward, all these Jews conspired to chase this innocent child from the earth's face. Down a dark alleyway they found and hired a murderer who owned that secret place. And as the boy passed at his happy pace, this cursed Jew grabbed him and held him, slit his little throat, and cast him in a pit. Cast him, I say, into a privy drain, where they were wont to void their excrement. O cursed folk of Herod, come again. Of what avail your villainous intent? Murder will out, and nothing can prevent God's honor spreading, even from such seed. The blood cries out upon your cursed deed. O martyr, wedded to virginity, now mayest thou sing and follow on and on the white celestial Lamb of heaven, said she, of whom the great evangelist St. John in Patmos wrote, who says that there they don white robes before that Lamb and sing afresh, that never have known woman in the flesh. This wretched widow waited all that night. She waited for her child, but all for naught. And very early in the morning light, all pale with sleepless dread and busy thought, she searched his school, then up and down she sought elsewhere, and finally she got the news that he was last seen in the street of Jews. Within her breast her mother's pity closed. She went about as one half out of mind to every place in which, as she supposed, there was some likelihood for her to find her child, and to Christ's mother, meek and kind, she cried in heart, and in the end was brought among the accursed Jews, and there she saw it. She made enquiry with a piteous cry of every Jew inhabiting that place, asking, oh, I don't even share this, I'm sorry. Did I? No, never mind. Is it shared?
Yeah, I'm sharing it.
Shared, okay. Thank you, Dory. Asking if they had seen her child go by, and they said no, but Jesus of his grace put in her thought, after a little space, to come upon that alley, as she cried, where in a pit he had been cast aside. Great God, that to perform thy praise hast called the innocent of mouth, how great thy might! This gem of chastity, this emerald, this jewel of martyrdom and ruby bright, lying with carven throat and out of sight, began to sing, O Alma, from the ground, till all the place was ringing with the sound. The Christian people going through the street came crowding up astonished at the thing, and sent to fetch the provost to entreat his presence, and he came and heard him sing. The provost, praising Christ, our heavenly King, and his dear mother, honor of mankind, bade all the Jews be fettered and confined. They took the child with piteous lamentation, and he was brought, still singing out his song, in high solemnity and celebration, towards the nearest abbey by the throng. His mother, swooning as they went along beside the bier, could not be reconciled. A second Rachel, weeping for her child. The provost then did judgment on the men who did the murder, and he bid them serve a shameful death and torment there and then on all those guilty Jews. He did not swerve. Evils shall meet the evils they deserve, and he condemned them to be drawn apart by horses. Then he hanged them from a cart. Still lay this innocent child upon his bier at the high altar while a mass was said. The abbot and his convent then drew near to hasten on his burial and spread a rain of holy water on his head. And as they let the holy water spill, he sang, O Alma Redemptoris still. This abbot then, who was a holy man, as abbots are, or else they ought to be, in invocation of the boy began to say aloud, Dear child, I conjure thee by virtue of the Holy Trinity to say how singing is permitted thee, although thy throat is cut, or seems to be. Through to the bone my neck is cut, I know, answered the child, and had I been confined by natural law, I should and long ago have died. But Christ, whose glory you may find in books, wills it be also kept in mind. So for the honor of his mother dear, I still may sing, O Alma, loud and clear. That well of mercy, sweetest mother of Christ, I long have loved with all that I could bring. This at the hour of my death sufficed to draw her down to me. She bade me sing this anthem till my time of burying, as you have heard, and when my song was sung, she seemed to lay a grain upon my tongue. And so I sing as I must sing again for love of her, the blissful and the free, till from my tongue you take away the grain. For after that the Virgin said to me, My little child, behold, I come for thee, when from thy tongue this grain of seed is taken. And have no fear, thou shalt not be forsaken. This holy monk, this abbot, even he touched the child's tongue and took away the grain. And he gave up the ghost so peacefully, so softly, and the marvel was so plain. Salt fell the abbot's tears and trickling rain, and down he fell, prostrate upon the ground, and lay as still as one who had been bound. And all the weeping convent also bent to earth and praised Christ's mother with many a tear. And after that they rose, and forth they went, taking this little martyr from his bier. And in a sepulchre of marble clear, enclosed his little body fair and sweet, where he now is, God grant we all may meet. O Hugh of Lincoln, likewise murdered so by cursed Jews, as is notorious, for it was but a little time ago. Pray mercy on our faltering steps, that thus merciful God may multiply on us his mercy, though we be unstable and vary in love and reverence of his mother Mary. All right, what are your reactions?
It's so much easier to understand when it's translated out of Middle English.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
It's a very powerful way of propagating and continuing anti-Semitism.
Mhm. Why, what makes it powerful?
Because the kid is so innocent and so beautiful and such a good kid, and the mother's, a widow, you can't get more sympathetic.
Yeah, yeah, okay, good, what else? Yeah,
The
Martha?
whole way it's written for the population, so it's nothing formal, it's nothing like St. Augustine, it's written in like a poem.
Yeah,
And so you could just read it or sing it or, and that's how Chaucer told the story. So it makes it very popular.
yeah, yes,
So like,
and then-
even if you don't know it, you start, you can sing it and that's how you learn it.
yeah, right, and it does become songs, and then he alludes at the end, he mentions Hugh of Lincoln was a boy in England, I think not long before this time, a century or so, before Chaucer, and there was a blood libel in Lincoln about this boy that was killed, and the accounts, there's accounts of the Hugh of Lincoln that then were turned into songs. Yeah, that people would sing. So this, so through art, literature and art is culture is perpetuated. And art is a very powerful way in which we convey culture, right? And Chaucer translates Paul and the Gospels and Augustine and, you know, all of these themes into poetry and story and, you know, beautiful writing, so forth, to make it, to convey this, and it's very powerful in its effect. Yeah, Nancy.
As a Jew, it's heartbreaking
Mhm.
and horrifying,
Yeah,
and as a Christian, it's uplifting.
why? Why would it be uplifting for Christians?
You see what a true believing child, how he's lifted up to heaven.
Yeah, and this isn't a genre of Christian literature of, in which Mary works miracles. I don't know much about it other than that is a genre of Christian, you know, literature, and I guess you even hear it like in, you know, the Beatles and Let It Be, right? Mother Mary comes to me speaking words of wisdom, you know, that Mary as a figure who does wonderful things for believers and so forth is portrayed here. Yeah, Frank, and then I want
The
to.
Jews listen to Satan,
Yes,
and that's the.
that's right.
Plot.
That's right, yeah. So here you see the Jews are the correlation in the character creation is that the little boy is pure and innocent like Jesus. And the Jews are monstrous and bloodthirsty like Satan, right? So if the cosmic battle is between Christ and Satan, the earthly battle is between Christian and Jew. They play these roles. You know, this is the cosmic dichotomy incarnate. All right, now we're gonna look, we just have a few
Dr.
minutes.
Karen has her hand up.
Okay, I'm sorry, I want to read the last text, we only have a few minutes. So, we're gonna read it, and then I'll stick around to take some questions. Let's take, Dory, if you would take the text down. I want to show the last one, which is Martin Luther. Okay, Martin Luther.
I just had that up.
What, you put it up?
Yeah, I already had it up.
Oh, great, okay, let's look at Luther. Martin Luther is the leader of the Protestant Reformation, which challenges the authority, the religious authority of the Catholic Church. And Luther accuses the church of corruption, which it was badly corrupt in Luther's time in the 16th century. I don't know if any of you have read about the Renaissance popes. They were some bad dudes. Did you ever watch the series The Borgias?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the popes were, I mean, they were fathering children and engaged in all kinds of corrupt, you know, stuff. Anyway, Martin Luther leads a rebellion against the authority of the Catholic Church. It's called the Protestant Reformation, and the purpose of the Reformation is to wrest authority, religious authority, away from the Pope. Now remember what we talked about when we started with Las Siete Partidas, was when I talked about the power struggle between king and church in that part of the Middle Ages. But here, things change in the 16th century with the Protestant Reformation, because now you have a serious challenge to the religious authority of the church from Luther and the Reformation, which brings the Catholic kings closer to the church, right? It's like, you know, there's an enemy from without. Now the family, the Catholic family, comes more strongly together. So what was in the 13th century kind of a disparity between religious ideology and practical, you know, and law and practice becomes more melded. and the Catholic kingdoms really do begin enacting and enforcing Catholic doctrine on Jews. Meanwhile, you have Luther coming along and challenging the church. And in 1523, he writes this essay about Jews. And we're going to read that first. A, that Jesus Christ was born a Jew. I will therefore show by means of the Bible the causes which induced me to believe that Christ was a Jew born of a virgin. Perhaps I will attract some of the Jews to the Christian faith. For our fools, the popes, bishops, sophists, and monks, the coarse blockheads, have until this time so treated the Jews that to be a good Christian, one would have to become a Jew. He's saying that the Pope and his people are so bad to Jews that that they're giving up all pretense of being good Christians. Right? This is Luther's attack on the church. And if I had been a Jew and had seen such idiots and blockheads ruling and teaching the Christian religion, I would rather have been a sow than a Christian. For they have dealt with the Jews as if they were dogs and not human beings. They have done nothing for them but curse them and seize their wealth. Whenever they converted them, they did not teach them either Christian law or life, but only subjected them to papistry and monkery. When these Jews saw that Judaism had such strong scriptural basis, and that Christianity, Catholicism, was pure nonsense without biblical support, how could they quiet their hearts and become real good Christians? I have myself heard from pious converted Jews that if they had not heard the gospel in our time from us Lutherans, they would always have remained Jews at heart in spite of their conversion. For they admit that they have never heard anything about Christ from the rulers who have converted them. I hope that if the Jews are treated friendly and are instructed kindly through the Bible, many of them will become real Christians and come back to the ancestral faith of the prophets and patriarchs. Note, Luther considered the heroes of the Old Testament good Christians. I would advise and beg everybody to deal kindly with the Jews and to instruct them in the scriptures. In such a case, we could expect them to come over to us. If, however, we use brute force and slander them, saying that they need the blood of Christians to get rid of their stench, and I know not what other nonsense of that kind, and treat them like dogs, what good can we expect of them? Note, medieval Christians believed in a Foetor Judaicus, a Jewish stench. Finally, how can we expect them to improve if we forbid them to work among us and to have social intercourse with us, and so force them into usury? If we wish to make them better, we must deal with them, not according to the law of the Pope, but according to the law of Christian charity. We must receive them kindly and allow them to compete with us in earning a livelihood, so that they may have a good reason to be with us and among us, and an opportunity to witness Christian life and doctrine. And if some remain obstinate, what of it? Not every one of us is a good Christian. I shall stop here now until I see what the results will be. May God be gracious to us all. Now Luther decided, I'm going to be, the church is so horrible to Jews. How do they expect to convert them? By being so horrible to them. We Protestants are going to be nice to Jews. And we're going to, kindly try to teach them the gospel and see if we, can get them over that way. Like Paul said, Paul's hope was that the Jews would come over. Paul didn't say be mean to them and persecute them. Paul said you have to be patient in time, they will see. Okay? So Luther is saying that. Well, guess what? Did Luther's campaign work? It did not work. And 20 years later, Luther writes another essay, and he changes his tune quite significantly. This one, Concerning the Jews and Their Lives, 1543. What then shall we Christians do with this damned, rejected race of Jews? He's referring to the Jews were rejected by God since they refused to accept Jesus as the Messiah. Since they live among us and we know about their lying and blasphemy and cursing, we cannot tolerate them if we do not wish to share in their lies, curses, and blasphemy. In this way, we cannot quench the inextinguishable fire of divine rage, as the prophets say, nor convert the Jews. We must prayerfully and reverentially practice a merciful severity. Perhaps we may save a few from the fire and the flames of hell. We must not seek vengeance. They are surely being punished 1,000 times more than we might wish them. Let me give you my honest advice. First, their synagogues or churches should be set on fire, and whatever does not burn up should be covered or spread over with dirt, so that no one may ever be able to see a cinder or stone of it. And this ought to be done for the honor of God and of Christianity, in order that God may see that we are Christians, and that we have not wittingly tolerated or approved of such public lying, cursing, and blaspheming of his Son and his Christians. Luther and others believe that the Jews cursed the Christians in their daily prayers. Secondly, their homes should likewise be broken down and destroyed, for they perpetrate the same things there that they do in their synagogues. For this reason, they ought to be put under one roof or in a stable like gypsies, in order that they may realize that they are not masters in our land as they boast, but miserable captives, as they complain of us incessantly before God with bitter wailing. Thirdly, they should be deprived of their prayer books and Talmuds, in which such idolatry, lies, cursing, and blasphemy are taught. Fourthly, their rabbis must be forbidden under the threat of death to teach anymore. Fifthly, passport and traveling privileges should be absolutely forbidden to the Jews, for they have no business in the rural districts, since they are not nobles, nor officials, nor merchants, nor the like. Let them stay at home. I have heard that there is a rich Jew riding around the country with a team of 12 horses. He wants to be a Messiah, and he is exploiting princes, nobles, land, and people to such an extent that important people look askance at this. This was the wealthy Michael, court Jew of Joachim II of Brandenburg, Luther's in Germany, a famous commercial magnate of the time. If you princes and nobles do not close the road legally to such exploiters, then some troop ought to ride against them, for they will learn from this pamphlet what the Jews are and how to handle them, and that they ought not be protected. You ought not, you cannot protect them, unless in the eyes of God you want to share all their abomination. Luther seems to be inciting the robber barons to attack the Jews on the roads. Michael, the wealthy Jew, was actually seized in 1549 by highwaymen acting as agents for some of the most prominent citizens of Magdeburg. Sixthly, they ought to be stopped from usury. Usury here means any degree of interest, not only an exorbitant rate. All their cash and valuables of silver and gold ought to be taken from them and put aside for safekeeping. For this reason, as said before, everything that they possess, they stole and robbed from us through their usury, for they have no other means of support. This money should be used in the case and no other, where a Jew has honestly become a Christian, so that he may get for the time being 100 or 200 or 300 florins as the person may require. This in order that he may start a business to support his poor wife and children and the old and feeble. Such evilly acquired money is cursed, unless with God's blessing it is put to some good and necessary use. Seventhly, let the young and strong Jews and Jewesses be given the flail, the axe, the hoe, the spade, the distaff, and spindle, and let them earn their bread by the sweat of their noses, as is enjoined upon Adam's children. For it is not proper that they should want us cursed Goyim to work in the sweat of our brow, and that they, pious crew, idle away their days at the fireside in laziness, feasting, and display. And in addition to this, they boast impiously that they have become masters of the Christians at our expense. We ought to drive the rascally lazy bones out of our system. If, however, we are afraid that they might harm us personally our wives, children, servants, cattle, when they serve us or work for us, since it is surely to be presumed that such noble lords of the world and poisonous bitter worms are not accustomed to any work, and would very unwillingly humble themselves to such a degree among the cursed goyim. Then let us apply the same cleverness, expulsion, as the other nations, such as France, Spain, Bohemia, etc., and settle with them for that which they have extorted usuriously from us. And after having divided it up fairly, let us drive them out of the country for all time. For as has been said, God's rage is so great against them that they only become worse and worse through mild mercy, and not much better through severe mercy. Therefore, away with them. To sum up, dear princes and nobles who have Jews in your domains, if this advice of mine does not suit you, then find a better one, so that you and we may all be free of this insufferable, devilish burden, the Jews. Okay. Now,
He's got a point.
okay, now you can see the change in Luther's attitude over the course of 20 years. And what he hit, so what do you notice in here? What themes do you notice? Arlene?
I don't know, it seems to be the same themes that in the beginning, he's, I guess, accepting Jews, we should be nice to them in the hopes that they'll convert. But then he became just like all his predecessors in the Catholic Church, the same accusations, the same punishments, even worse, because the rest of the readings, they stay by themselves and don't bother anybody. We'll leave them alone. He
Yeah.
like really.
He's advocating violence against Jews, right? He's advocating violence. He describes Jews as, stubborn and willfully rejecting Christ, as rejected by God, as stealing, extorting money from Christians through their money lending, profiting off of us wrongly. Then.
It's just real personal and sadistic.
Yeah.
He really luxuriates in this.
Yeah.
There's this ideation, this fantasy of,
Yeah.
when he's saying, well, we shouldn't take revenge, we must not seek vengeance, but then he just goes.
Yeah. This is really the first reading that we've seen, like, where I would say anyway, it feels like real hatred,
Yes.
right? Hatred. It's not strictly like doctrinaire, ideological, religious description. This is real hatred. And this description here, we need to get rid of our burden, the Jews. You will see that language occur again and again going forth into the Enlightenment and in Germany and so forth. The Jews as a burden on society, as they're cast here as leeches. The Jews are in the society. He says, give them axes and hoes, like let them do actual work. They don't do work. They just sit there with money. They just profit off of the money, and they're lazy. Okay, this is a big theme that later anti-Semites will develop. Pat.
My question is, what happened to him in those 20 years?
I don't know enough about
Jews wouldn't convert.
I mean, I think the main thing is that his campaign he was humiliated because he was attacking the church for their methods with the Jews and saying, you got it all wrong. We're going to try it my way and I'll show you. And he was humiliated because the Jews didn't convert. So he's very angry. I don't know what else was going on.
Rabbi?
Well, still the idea too that the Jews think they're superior to us.
Yes, they think they're better. Yeah, was there a question online?
Nina and Renee have a question.
Yes.
Okay, Nina and Renee, go ahead.
Hey, Sharon, I'm here with Nina. Rabbi, early on, it was clear that the Jews were important. Why? Because they were the only ones who could handle the money.
Yeah.
And as the Christians began to be able to handle their money and funds, the Jews became
a group that was not necessary, which is
Yeah,
true,
that's right.
which is true in not in civilizations, you know, going back thousands of years. When
Yeah.
a group is important, then they're extolled, and when they don't need them anymore, well, of course, the Jews became more hated than anything else. But it's it just seems to me that, you know, this goes on forever and ever. And now, listen, there are groups in the United States that apparently people don't like either. So
Yeah.
it's a constant
Okay,
thing.
all right, good. I think I want to get one more, Susan's last comment tonight. Go ahead, Susan. It's 8:45.
I read all this because, you know, in high school we learn it and all that, but I actually gasped when it said, let them earn their bread by the sweat of their noses. This concept of our noses, and just really, I don't know, I was.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
Well, because Jews have.
Well, right, I don't know if that's what he's alluding to or not. Maybe he is.
Sweat of their brows.
Maybe he is. Yeah, because the Christian, the sweat of the brow. So maybe he is. But we've seen a turn now by the 16th century with Luther. We've seen a turn from maybe a more benign religiously doctrinaire anti-Judaism to a vitriolic anti-Semitism. Okay, this is an important turn in this history because going forward now, it's gonna be like this. It's gonna be like this. Okay, all right, it's 8:46, so I wanna end the class. Everyone can be free to go. I'll stick around and if you have more questions, I'm happy to talk, but I don't wanna keep everyone. All right, and remember, next week, we will be meeting. Next week, Martha and Andy are gonna present. We're going to start our unit on Muslim anti-Semitism. Thanks, everybody.